You know, they say the greatest strategic failure is trying to compete better in an old category. But what if the real secret, the way to capture a massive 76% of a market's value, is to just eliminate the competition entirely, to actually define a whole new problem? In a world that's just saturated with options, where every market feels crowded, the old advice to just build a better product or shout louder, well, that's a recipe for failure. Today, we're not talking about that. We are exploring a completely different path, a much more radical strategy for designing a future where your company doesn't just compete, it dominates. This is the art and science of category creation.
This one sentence, right here, it flips decades of business school wisdom completely on its head. We're all taught to build a better mousetrap, right? To fight tooth and nail for a bigger piece of the pie. But that, right there, that's the real trap. It's just a race to the bottom in a super crowded, noisy arena where the rewards get smaller and smaller and standing out becomes almost impossible. You're fighting over inches when you could be creating an entirely new universe.
So let's just ask a radical question. What if the path to real lasting value isn't about winning the game at all, but about inventing a brand new one? A game where you're the only player, you write all the rules, and you know what? You take home all the rewards. Now this isn't some fantasy, and it's definitely not about a once-in-a-generation stroke of genius. It's a calculated, strategic discipline that anyone can learn and execute.
And here it is. Here is the number that proves just how powerful this strategy is. 76%. Research shows that the company that creates a category captures on average 76% of that category's entire market cap. Just let that sink in for a second. We are not talking about 76% of the market share for a single year. We're talking about the huge majority of all the economic value created in that space over the long term. This is the massive prize for becoming the category king.
And that brings us to the real battleground. You see, the fight isn't for market share, it's for mind share. This game is not one with better features or lower prices or even slicker ads. It's one long before a customer even thinks about making a purchase. It's won by anchoring a new reality, a whole new way of thinking, right inside the customer's mind. The goal here is to transform someone who isn't even aware of a problem into a passionate evangelist for your new category.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. We've just touched on the 76% paradox. Next up, we'll dive deep into the engine behind it all, the creation trinity. Then, we'll explore the psychology of dominance that makes this whole thing work so well. And finally, we'll walk through the creator's playbook, an actionable framework you can actually use.
All right, let's get under the hood. The core idea here is that market domination isn't something you win by competing, it's something you engineer. You achieve it by perfectly aligning three key components that work together like a super powerful engine. And when these parts are perfectly synchronized, they create instant, lasting leadership. This is what we call the creation trinity.
And here are those three pillars. It all starts with the category thesis. This is about reframing the problem itself. Next, you need the category-defining product, the specific solution that perfectly delivers on the promise of that new thesis. And finally, you have the synchronized go-to-market, a ruthless strategy to train the market on this new reality. When these three are perfectly in sync, they create what feels like a monopoly, not in the market, but in the customer's mind. Let's break down that first one, because it's the most important.
So, the category thesis. This is the absolute heart of the entire strategy. Seriously, think of it as your company's single most valuable piece of intellectual property, more valuable than your code, your patents, maybe even your brand. This is where the real leverage is. You're not selling a product, you are selling a new point of view. You're creating a powerful new story that exposes a critical flaw in how things are done now, and you frame the old way as the villain that just has to be defeated.
This slide shows a perfect example with Salesforce. Before they came along, the old way, the villain, was that enterprise software was a nightmare. It was complex, expensive, and lived on your own servers. Salesforce didn't just sell a better CRM, no, they sold a radical new thesis, that software should be effortless and live in the cloud. Their famous No Software campaign wasn't about the product at all. It was about reframing the entire problem, creating a new mental model where they were the only logical choice.
Okay, so once the market buys into your new thesis, your product has to deliver on that promise. And it has to be flawless. This can't be just a small improvement. The product has to be the undeniable proof that your new way is superior. If your thesis is all about simplicity, the product has to be radically simpler. Every feature, every design choice has to be a physical embodiment of your story,
making you the only logical choice for anyone who believes in the new way.
And finally, you have to enforce this new reality. That's the whole job of this synchronized go-to-market strategy. It's about this ruthless alignment where every single touchpoint, every ad, every sales call is focused on selling the thesis first and the product second. Your sales team spends most of their time contrasting the broken old way with the new. Your content uses the language of your thesis until the market actually adopts it as their own. It's about training the entire ecosystem, customers, media, analysts, to see the world through your new lens.
So, we've seen the what, the three pillars of the creation trinity. But why is this system so devastatingly effective? Well, the answer, maybe unsurprisingly, lies in psychology. This strategy works because it taps into fundamental cognitive biases to literally rewire how your customers think, how they see the world, and ultimately how they make decisions. The main psychological lever here is a cognitive bias called anchoring, and we are all wired for this. The very first piece of information we get on a topic, it acts like a mental anchor, and it heavily influences every single judgment we make after that. It becomes the mental reference point for everything else. You know, the first price you see for a house, that sets your expectation for the whole neighborhood. The first diagnosis you hear from a doctor, that frames your entire understanding of your health. It's a powerful, automatic shortcut our brains use.
And this is the strategic genius of category creation. By being the first one to define the problem and the new category, your brand becomes the anchor. It's incredible. All your competitors are now forced to orbit around you. When they eventually show up, they have to define themselves in relation to you. We're the cheaper version of X, or we're the enterprise alternative to Y. And by doing that, they are implicitly and very publicly admitting that you are the leader. They are playing on your map.
And beyond anchoring, there are other powerful levers at play. First, it massively reduces the buyer's cognitive load. Look, our brains are lazy. They want to save energy. So instead of making people wade through a sea of confusing options and comparing endless feature lists, you give them one clear, simple choice. Second, it creates an emotional connection. By framing the old way as a common enemy, you're not just selling a tool. You're uniting your audience in a shared mission, with your brand as the hero leading the charge.
Okay, so we've covered the theory and the psychology. Now let's get practical. How do you actually do this? This is the Creator's Playbook, an actionable framework for mastery, breaking the whole process down into clear operational steps. It really just boils down to these three operational steps. First, you have to identify the fatal flaw in the current way of doing things. Second, you engineer the thesis that exposes and solves that flaw. And third, you align your go-to-market to ruthlessly enforce that new reality across every single channel. Now, let's focus on this first step, because you have to be super precise here. The fatal flaw can't just be some minor inconvenience. It has to be a structural problem that's baked into your competitors' very business models, a problem they can't possibly fix without basically destroying themselves. Think of it like the one Jenga block that if you pull it, their whole tower just comes crashing down. That is your point of maximum leverage. And this chart here shows the radical discipline you need for go-to-market alignment. The rule is simple, but it's incredibly hard to follow. 80% of your effort, your ad spend, your sales conversations, all of it, should be focused on selling the new category, not your product. You're selling the problem, the story, the new way. Only 20% is about the product itself. I know, this feels completely backward to most founders and sales leaders, but trust me, it is the critical key to success. And the logic behind that 80-20 rule is actually pretty simple. I mean, just ask yourself this. If your customer doesn't buy into the new category, why on earth would they ever buy your product? If they don't believe the old map is broken, they'll never look for a new one. You have to sell the new map first. You have to convince them the world has changed before you can ever hope to sell them on your destination.
So, let's be crystal clear about the end game here. The goal of category creation is not to beat the competition. It's to make them irrelevant. They're left holding these meticulously crafted solutions to a problem that the market no longer believes is the right one to solve. You haven't just won the game, you've changed it completely, leaving them playing an old version that nobody cares about anymore. And that brings us to the final essential takeaway. True market dominance isn't about pushing people through a sales funnel, it's about pulling them toward a new vision of the future. The best marketing draws a brand new map of the world for your customer, a map where your brand isn't just one of the options. No, it's the center. It's the only logical starting point for their journey.